Hey everyone, my name is Sandeep and I'm back with another video. So in the last video we talked on topics such as strings. We saw what a string is, which I had taught earlier, but we also saw what are the properties of a string. We also saw what are the methods that string offers. We talked about some properties and methods as well. We talked about one property in particular, which was length, which returns us the length of the string, and we talked about methods. So we saw some methods such as when we pass a character in that method, we get the index which of which it is there inside that string, and vice versa. We also spoke about logical operators as well as comparators. So these two can allow us to build meaningful applications, and these are a very essential part of any programming language. There's also one more topic which is essential, which is loops. So coming to loops, let me go to the JS basics file which I made, and let me get rid of this history. So after it gets deleted, and it is deleted, um, I'll just get rid of this code as well since it is no longer necessary. Okay, so now what if I want hello user in my terminal, let's say 3 times. So based on the knowledge so far, what I would do is I would say console log 3 times. So I'll say console log once. So if I want, for example, hello user to be printed on my terminal, I'm going to type it out. I'm going to say hello user inside my console log. And since I want it to be printed 3 times in my terminal, what I would do is I would write it 2 times more. Meaning I'll just copy this line of code and I'll paste it here. So I've made it 3, and I'll save this file and I'll run this file as well. So I'm using the node terminal, so I'll say a node and I'll write the name of the file. So my name of the file is js-basics, as you can see over here. So if I write js-basics and if I hit enter, you can see as expected. Alright, now that it is logged 3 times in my console, what if I want to be logged 20 times in the console, or let's say 100 times? So does that mean I'm going to write console log 100 times? And no, right? That would be like absolutely ridiculous. So instead of that, we will be using a concept known as loops, which is in JavaScript as it is in any programming language, at least what I've worked on so far. So um, so there are two types of loops in JavaScript. So one is the for loop and second is the while loop. So we will be discussing the for loop, which so most commonly for loop is the one which is used most commonly. So I'm going to type out for. So for is a keyword, and over here you pass 3 statements. So the first will be the assignment statement, where we initialize a variable. So in my case, I'll just say I'll run a loop 3 times. So in that case, I'll pass an assignment variable, which will be, so when I assigning, I'll say where, and let's say I'll keep the name of the variable as I, and I'm going to say is equal to 0, and we will separate each of the statements with a semicolon. Okay, and the second thing after assignment, so this is the assignment. So the syntax of for is something like this. So here is the assignment, and then semicolon, then comes the condition. So every time it runs, it checks the condition. So if it is true, it is going to run again. If it is false, it is going to exit the loop. So then is going to come the condition, and after condition comes the increment or decrement. So I'll just write it as inc/dc, which stands for increment and decrement. So if I now that I've assigned my variable I equal to 0, I would like to place a condition. Now, as I said, I just want it to be logged 3 times in my console. So I would say I less than 3, and makes sense, right? Now I is 0 and I want I less than 3, and now obviously I would want to increment after each iteration. So I'm going to say I plus plus, and just like functions, I'll be opening a curly brace after parenthesis, and over here will be the body of the code. So here, when I say body of the code, I mean the code that will be run after each iteration. So in my case, I want hello user to be logged 3 times in the console. So I'm gonna write, I'm just gonna cut this line and I'm gonna paste it here. So Control X and Control V, and if I format it here. So now as you can see, now it makes sense. So first what I'm doing is I'm assigning my variable I equal to 0 and I'm saying I less than 3. So what is happening over here is first, okay, first let me run this and then check. So if I run this, okay, so these two are, I'll just get rid of these two lines and now I'll run this. So as you can see, my hello user get logs 3 times in the console, and how it is, what is the mechanism of it, I'll be discussing it. So yeah, so first what happens is I assign the variable I equal to 0, and then it checks if I is less than 3. So if this condition is true, it is going to execute the body of the code. And for as per this example, we just have one line of code on which, as you can see on line number 97, which says console log user, right? So it is going to check if I is less than 3. So initially I is 0 and it is going to check. So first check would be the first check would be if 0 is less than 3. So as you can see, 0 is less than 3 is true. That means it is going to execute this line of code, line number 97, and after it is done executing the code, it will increment itself. So now this time I won't be 0, but it would be incremented by 1, as the plus plus stands for post increment, which means it gets incremented by 1 with whatever value it has initially. So since it has a value of 0 initially, it will be incremented by 1. So my second check would be, now that my value is incremented from 0 to 1, it would be if 1 is less than 3. Now that 1 is less than 3 is true, it is going to execute this line of code again, so on. And now coming to the third check, so the third check, again it will increment, so and that's what I plus plus is there for. And now from 1 it will increment itself by 1. That means 1 plus 1 will make it 2, and it will check for this statement. So 2 is less than 3, my condition, right? So yeah, 2 is less than 3 obviously. So now that if 2 is less than 3, it is going to execute it once more. And as you can see over here, hence 3 lines of hello user we get in the terminal. And after it increments itself in the fourth check, so if I write fourth check, and now after incrementing, it will be 2 to 3. So it will be, the condition check will be 3 is less than 3. So as you can see that this is absolutely wrong. 3 cannot be greater, 3 cannot be less than 3, sorry. So uh, hence this loop will be exited. Now coming to the next loop, which is the while loop. So when I say while loop, so if I talk about the syntax of while loop, it is kind of pretty old school. So as you can see, for the for loop, you pass in 3 parameters and you just blindly write the code inside the curly brace. While loop is a bit different from that, so we will be seeing it. So the syntax for while is, so let me comment it, right? So yeah, so first we write the keyword while, and then inside parenthesis we place the condition. So here the condition will come, and as similarly to the for loop, in the while loop we'll put our code inside the curly brace, and we will be writing the increment variable over here. So the increment variable will come over here. All right. So covering the same example as we did earlier, I'll just comment it for now since we don't need it anymore. And now let me write while. So while is a keyword, as you can see. You can see it is highlighted in purple as well. So while, and inside we'll be writing a condition. So and right now my condition would be I. So before writing the condition, we have to initialize a variable. So the initialized variable will lie outside the loop, obviously. So I will write var I equal to 0. So I'm using the same name as I did for the for loop. So I'll say var I equal to 0, and I've initialized on top of the while loop. And inside the while loop, now inside these parentheses, I need to pass a condition. So similar to the for loop, the condition will remain same, which is I is less than 3, as you can see right here. So I'm going to say I is less than 3, and I'm going to put my code inside curly braces. And similar to the for loop, I have just one line of code, that is console.log hello user. So I'm just going to copy it and I'm going to paste it right here. And after pasting, as you can see, I've written over here, we need an increment or decrement. So in this case, I've initialized my variable I to 0. So I need to increment it. So I'll say I plus plus right here. And now let's save this file and let's just run it and check if we have done anything. So as you can see, my hello user gets logged 3 times, and it's pretty simple. So what we have done is we have just initialized a variable outside the while loop, and then inside the while loop, inside the parenthesis, it takes one parameter, that is the condition itself. So since I have initialized I equal to 0, I'll say my condition is I less than 3. So as I've written over here, the first, second, third and fourth check, the while loop does it in a similar fashion. The difference is in the syntax, obviously. So if the condition is true, the code inside the curly brace will get executed. So hello user gets logged every time this code runs, and the variable I gets incremented. Also, I would like to cover an example where instead of using the increment, we would go for the decrement. So I'll just use the same example, but this time the change will be in the initialized or the assigned variable. So in this case, my assigned variable lies over here, which is I equal to 0. So instead of I equal to 0, let's say I is equal to 3 this time, and instead of I less than 3, my condition for check would be I greater than 0. And makes sense, right? So every time it's gonna check for the condition I wanted to run. I want this code inside the curly brace to be executed 3 times. But now I won't be incrementing the variable I would be decrementing it rather. So initially my I is 3, and it's gonna check. So first time 3 is greater than 0, that is true, right? So it is gonna execute this line of code, and I would want my I to decrement so that it gets executed only 3 times, right? So let me save this and let me run it in my terminal. So as you can see, my output stays the same regardless of whether I use an increment or decrement operator. It just depends on the situation. So I find the increment to be more easy, and I would prefer everyone to go with the increment unless and until you're not forced to use a decrement operator. So that's it from my side. And one more thing which I would like to say is always make sure to put the increment or decrement operator inside the curly brace. Otherwise, what would happen is it would run an infinite loop. So if in case, let's say if I comment it out and I save it, so it will run an infinite loop. So as you can see, hello user gets logged every time, and I would have to exit the terminal to close the program. Alright, so now that I've covered with the loops, coming to the next topic, which is objects. So as per my last video, I showed you the diagram of the two types of data types in JavaScript. So one is a primitive data types and one is a non-primitive data types. And when I say non-primitive data types, what I mean to say is those are reference data types. So under the primitives, we have number, we have string, we have boolean, and we have null, and we have undefined as well. Whereas when we speak of reference data types, we have objects, we have functions, and we have arrays. So right now I'll be coming to objects. Objects are simply a collection of properties, and in JavaScript, properties are a key value pairs. So let me pick up an example. Let me pick up an example of a person, let's say. Now, what possible properties can a person have? A person can have a first name, a person can have a last name, a person can have an age, and a person can have an email as well. So all these what I've said right now are its properties. Now each property can have a key and have a value as well. So speaking of name, let's say if I'm talking about me as a person, my name is Sandeep. So my first name is a key and my value of my first name is Sandeep. Similarly to that, I would have a key as an age and its value. So in JavaScript, the way we write an object is we use curly braces. So I'll just show you. So if I write, I'll say variable. All right. So now instead of using object, what I could do is I could say variable. I could say variable first name is equal to Sandeep. Variable age is equal to 23. But all this you can see is like I just made two variables, and these are essentially related, right? They are describing me. So instead of doing this, what we can do is we can make go for objects. So I can avoid all the trouble, and what I'm going to say is I'll say variable person, and that person happens to be me. So I'll say variable and person, and as you can see I've made a curly brace over here. So these curly braces are nothing but object literals. So this is how you define an object. So inside this object I'm going to give it a key and a value, right? So I'm going to fill it with properties. So that's why I said it is a collection of properties. So my first property is my first name, so I'm going to say first name, and I'll give it a value of Sandeep since it is. So I'll say Sandeep, and then I'll say last name, which is Krishnan, and then I'll give it an age. So since age is always a number, it will be 23. And so for the time being, I'll just keep it till this much. And so this is my object, as you can see. So I have a first name of Sandeep, my last name is Krishnan, and my age as 23. So what if I want to access a single value? So when dealing with objects, how do I do that? So basically there are two operators that we can use. So the first is a dot operator, which happens to be a dot itself, and then comes a square bracket operator. So let me, for example, let me just fetch this value of Sandeep. So how will I do that? So I'll just comment the previous code out since it is no longer required. So I'll just say console log, and my name of the object is person, so I'm going to type out person. And as I said, if I want to access a single value inside an object, we use a dot operator or the square bracket. So first I'll show with the dot operator. So all you got to do is after you write the object name, you just have to type the dot, and then as you can see over here, these are the properties of my object. So as a person, I have defined an age, I've defined a first name, and I've defined a last name. So let's say if I want to access my name, so first name, let's say in this case, so I'll say person dot first name, and if my expectations are right, I should be getting Sandeep logged in my terminal, which I am. So using a dot operator, you can access a value, and now I'll show you how you do it for with a square bracket notation. So instead of dot, you just have to put a square bracket around the name of the property, and we are not done yet. So we need this first name needs to be enclosed in a string, and once I do that, which I did right now, we should be good to go. So again, my output should not change irrespective of my notation. Right, so as you can see, both the cases. So now you might be thinking, since both do the same thing, which operator should I use while accessing a value inside an object? So as you can see, the dot notation over here is quite short and quite concise as well. So I would say always go with the dot operator whenever you want to achieve the purpose. But there are going to be some cases where you would have to use the square bracket notation. So let's say the first, I'll give you a first example of when you have to use a square bracket notation. So let's say instead of using the camel casing, let's say if I keep it separate, and if I enclose the key inside inverted commas. Now if I use the dot operator, I won't be able to access this, and I'll show you as well. So I'll just use a dot operator, which I know I won't be able to, but still. So as you can see right here, I cannot access this, right? So even if I put it inside a inverted commas, I won't be able to access it. It will throw me an error while running. So as you can see, I get some error like unexpected string. Usually because after the dot operator, you are expecting a variable name as opposed to a string. So in this case, if you want to access this variable Sandeep, then we would be using the square bracket notation. So I'll just do that and show you guys. Okay, now if I save it and now if I run it, I should get Sandeep logged in my terminal, which as you can see, right? This is one example. Let's say another example. So let's say I'm building an application where I want the user to pick a selected color, and I want that color to be logged in the console. Right, so as you might have figured it out, this is quite dynamic. So I cannot pass a predefined value to an object, right? In this case, so like let's say if my selected color is red, then if the user changes it to blue and I want it to be logged in the terminal, so in that case, that value is going to change, right? Okay, so don't worry if you haven't understood this part. I'll be probably covering it in some other video. But as long as you have understood what I've done so far, you are good to go. And there's another way also where you can access a single value inside an object, and that is something known as destructuring. Now, I won't be teaching destructuring in this video as it is a kind of an advanced concept, but it really makes it very easy to access any value inside an object. So, the last thing which I would like to show you all is you can even add properties inside of an object. So let's say if I want to say add an email inside of my object, all I got to do is I'll say person dot. So I want to add an email inside, so I'm going to say dot email is equal to, I'll say Sunday at the rate gmail.com, something like that. All right, and now if I check for my email, it should come. So if I save it and if I run this file, so as you can see, I got my email. So basically what I've done is I've just added a property, an extra property in fact, which is email to my object, right? Now that I'm accessing single values, let's see if I try to access the object itself. So I think I'm going to get an object. So if I run this file, you can see I got an object, right? So as you can see, this is an object which has a first name, which has a last name, age, and I've added an email as well. So you can use a dot operator for adding an extra value as well, right? So we have at this point we are pretty much done with objects. All right. So now many of you might be wondering as to when should I use an object. So I would say whenever you are you're making multiple variables which essentially relate to the same thing, I would say rather make an object. So right here I gave an example earlier that I declared two variables known as the first name and age. As you can see, these two variables refer to me only. So rather I could make a one object. Inside that I can assign key value pairs as I did over here. So in the whenever you face such an obstacle, I would use objects. Now coming to the last data type, which is arrays. So arrays are essentially a collection of items, right? So for just to give you an example, let's say we are building an application, the same which I gave earlier, where uh, a list of colors is given to user, and a user is asked to pick any one color. So in that case, how am I going to write all the list of colors? So one option is I could write where color 1, so I'll say color 1 is equal to red, then where color 2 is equal to green, let's say, and so on, right? Sorry, yeah, and so on. So let's say if I have some 20 or 30 colors, probably more than that, I'm not going to make 30 variables, right? I'm not going to sit down and I'm going to make 30 variables. So in that case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make one array, which will be collection of all the colors which will be presented to the user on the screen, right? So the common way of making an array is we use these square bracket notations right here. So if I make an array, so let's say if I say where selected color is equal to, so I've made use of these square bracket notations for making an array. So far this indicates that I've made an empty array, and I'm calling it empty because it has no values inside it, right? So let's say if I pass some values, let's say if I say red and green, and since I don't no longer need this, I'll comment it out. All right, so now I've made an array variable as selected color equal to red and green. Right now we have two colors. So what if I want to access any value inside an array, right? So what I can do is I'll be using the square bracket notation, and inside the square bracket notation we will be passing the index, right? So as I discussed earlier, in JavaScript it is as for any other language, any other programming language, at least with which I have worked, every programming language follows a zero based indexing. Similarly, JavaScript also follows zero based indexing, meaning that the first value inside the array gets an index of 0 and the next gets 1 and so on, right? So we'll be accessing any value of an array using these square bracket notations, and I'm going to show you how. So just to check, I'll say console.log, and I'm going to write the name of the variable. In this case it is selected color, so I'll say selected color. And as I said, whenever we want to access, we'll be using the square bracket notation, so I'll make a square bracket notation. And right now let's say if I want to access the first value, which is red, so I'll pass the index which is 0, so red has an index of 0. And if I run this code, and I'll just comment this objects out as well, and let me save it, let me run it. So as you can see, I get red as the output. All right, similarly if I do 1 over here, which has the value of green, I'm going to get green outputted. So as you can see, green. All right, and I can even add data inside the array, meaning that I can expand the array. So I'll show you how can I do that. So all I got to do is I got to say selected color, which is the name of the variable we have, name of the array we have, my bad again. And so since I want to expand it, my two positions are occupied, so the next the extra value that comes will take the index of 2, right? So this has 0, this has 1, and the next data will have the index as 2. So inside here I'm going to say 2, and I'm going to say, let's say my next value will be blue, right? So now I'll hit enter and I'll just console log my array, and let's see. So if I save it, if I run it, you can see now my array has three values, namely red, green, and blue, right? So as you saw, we can even expand the array. So what if I want to get the number of items in my array presently, right? So how am I going to do that? So here even arrays has a property known as length. So I've taught you how to access a property. All you got to do is just use a dot notation. So I'll just console log. So this is the name of my array, which is selected color, and I'll be using the dot operator. So dot, and as you can see, these are all the properties, and some of which I will be discussing later. So right now I need length, so I'm going to say dot length. And now if I save my code and if I run it, I get 3 as the length, and which it is. So there are 3 items inside my array, so I get 3, right? Okay, so now that I've even discussed the properties of an array, what if I want to iterate inside that array, meaning that I want to print each and every value inside that array? So how am I going to do that? So here we'll be making use of the for loop which we discussed earlier, right? So I'm going to say for, and as I've discussed, so for this for is a keyword, and now I'm going to be passing three parameters inside my for loop. So one is going to be the assignment operator. So I'm going to say variable I equal to 0 and I less than. So how am I supposed to get the length of an array, right? So like since I want to iterate my whole array, want the length of the array. So as I've discussed earlier, this is the way you get the length of an array. So I'll just copy it and I'll paste it over here, right? And since I've said variable I equal to 0, I'll be incrementing it. So I'll say I plus plus, and I'll be opening my curly braces. So here my body of code will lie, meaning the code which needs to be iterated will be placed over here. So in my case, I just want to see the value inside an array, right? So what I'm going to say is I'm going to say console.log, and I'm going to say selected color. We are not done here, right? So we want to access each and every item inside an array, and I have taught you how to access each item inside an array. So we will be making use of the square bracket notation, and so this I is going to change, right? So we'll be putting I over here. So in my first iteration I will be 0, second will be 1, and third it will be 2. So like that all my values inside the array will be printed, and let's just see. So I'll just comment it out, and since it is no longer required, and I'll save this file and I'll run it. So as you can see, I get red, green, blue. So this green is coming from here, so just ignore it. So as you can see over here, we are getting red, green and blue, which are inside an array, right? So using this looping mechanism, you can check every element inside an array, right? And you can manipulate it accordingly. So far I've covered everything, like I've covered all the reference data types in JavaScript, and I'm pretty much done with all the basic stuff and everything. So if you guys like this video so far, please make sure to give it a like, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel, just subscribe it right away. And if you have any doubts so far, you can ping me at my Instagram handle mentioned in the description box below. Till then, see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.